Last year, I played a metroidvania that disappointed me so deeply I lost my zest for playing games of this genre completely for many, many months. Happy to say that now I am completely cured of that unfortunate affliction thanks to MIO Memories in Orbit, an absolute marvel of a metroidvania that I think deserves your closest attention. I missed my chance to play MIO's demo when it was out, so I just dived right in. Recently, I have abandoned all expectations for video games and I just go in completely blind, expecting nothing but the genre basics, and I have to say, more often than not, I end up being pleasantly surprised. In MIO, you play as, well, MIO, a tiny robot who awakens in the vessel, a giant arc ship drifting in the endless space. At some point, it fell into ruin and is now overgrown with wild vegetation, many of its robotic workers malfunctioning, and the reason remains unclear. In the Nexus, the central part of the vessel, you find She, an overseer who helps you navigate the ship as you are trying to uncover not only its many secrets and the mysterious events that led to its fall, but also its true purpose. I love the world building in MIO. It's somewhat bizarre, but the more time you spend exploring the spaceship, the more it starts feeling like home, even though it is largely decrepit and unkind. The vessel is governed by pearls, complex AI systems that are responsible for different parts of the ship and its maintenance. However, they seem to have abandoned their function, deteriorated and stopped responding, leaving the vessel to its grim fate. To understand why the ship is overrun by often aggressive vegetation, you will have to travel into the heart of the most overgrown part of the ship and ask the breath about it, and the breath is the pearl responsible for managing plants and foliage on the vessel. What malfunction befell them? One of the pearls, the spine, is hanging just above your hub area, the Nexus, but they have gone fully inside their pearl shell and won't open to talk to you. Their librarian, Estragon, is waiting patiently on the bridge before them in case the spine opens up and speaks. Each pearl also has a keeper, and these two entities are bound to each other like siblings. The dense, interconnected world of the vessel has many a mystery for you to uncover, but you are definitely a part of this fairly complicated world, and I find it very appealing. Being a stranger to a game's setting, an adventurer passing by, or a traveler journeying through has its charm, undoubtedly, but being a part of the decaying world that is falling apart, your own home, gives this feeling of urgency and almost despair as you are trying to fix everything because this is your world too. MIO will stay with me as a game that has the freshest of takes on a metroidvania formula, and I would love to explain in detail what I mean, but that would be spoiling the most wonderful parts that left me just staring at my screen for 3 minutes straight, being like, wait, what? It works. How? But there are smaller things I can tell you about. For example, there is no healing in the game that you can perform yourself. There are basins you can come across, and those can replenish your protective coat for a little bit of currency, but you cannot just heal whenever you please. This might sound off-putting, but I personally didn't find this to be a problem. Basins are strategically placed during platforming sections and before boss encounters, along with replenishable currency stashes or enemies that drop it, so with little effort you can be in a tip-top shape before any big challenge. Fighting bosses with no option for healing doesn't sound particularly inspiring, but I found it quite refreshing, as I could just focus on dodging and dealing damage without punctuating the flow of battle with an attempt to heal myself. Another somewhat unorthodox thing is that your map updates only at checkpoints. If you remember how shocked people were when Hollow Knight came out and you had to buy stuff for filling out the map, well, in MIO there are no such things at all. You will see a faint glimmer marking you in the absolute nothingness of the map, and a thin line very roughly outlining your path from the last overseer you visited, but the map won't get drawn with all its rooms, corridors and hallways until you sit down at an overseer again. Undeniably, it was uncomfortable at first, but then I found that it somehow added to the adventure. MIO doesn't have that large of a map to get completely lost at any point, so not knowing where you are exactly when you're braving new areas wasn't that big of a deal, considering that almost always you are either moving towards a new overseer or circling around to the one you started from. In MIO, you lose all currency upon death and it is not recoverable. There is no body to pick up. If it is any consolation, all your currency isn't just lost to the void but goes to another cause. Thankfully, there are chunks of solidified currency lying around that you can pick up, and those are not lost upon death. There are also crystallizers that you can find while exploring, where you can crystallize all your loose currency into chunks at no additional cost at all. For me, believe it or not, losing everything upon death was almost a selling point because I simply despise the idea of going back to the place of death to pick up my remains. I've grown to absolutely hate it over the years for many reasons, so when a rare game shows up where this system is absent or executed somehow differently, it literally brings light back into my soul. I never felt like I lacked money or had to save up for a long time or, God forbid, grind for currency, even though I died a fair bit. I explored every nook and cranny and found so many unlosable crystallized chunks that dying hardly impacted my financial standing. Now I feel like I'm doing a terrible job recommending this game to you because I just said it has no healing mechanic you can use on your own, the map is not being drawn as you go, and all currency is lost upon death forever. All these things would sound awful to me too, but having completed the game, I can say with full certainty that each of these decisions has been considered very carefully by the devs, and then somehow balanced with another aspect of the game until it made sense. Many games fall into the metroidvania genre, but funnily enough, there is no way of knowing the balance between platforming and fighting until you play it yourself. For me personally, Hollow Knight has always been equal parts platforming and combat. Nine Souls, a spectacular game, is definitely more about fighting than platforming. Ori and the Blind Forest, I'd say, is more platforming than fighting. MIO, on the other hand, is more about exploration and going places, definitely on the platforming side, but it has exciting fights too. While there aren't many enemies roaming the map because the vessel is a closed system and not all its inhabitants have yet gone mad, the game has quite a number of thrilling boss fights that I absolutely loved. Most of them are built on some kind of a gimmick idea, and more often than not, bosses have an arena that is somehow special, not necessarily spikes on the floor or disappearing platforms. All these things, special arenas, funny gimmicks, and unexpected events during fights, are made possible by one simple thing. There is no contact damage. I know, right? Contact damage has become unfortunately ubiquitous in Metroidvanias because Metroid has it, which is true. However, in Metroid you have ranged weapons and enemies are more like hazards you need to avoid, while in some modern Metroidvanias enemies charge at you full speed and do damage to you just by touching, which is not even an attack. In MIO, however, contact damage doesn't exist, which allows for slippery arenas, updrafts for you to ride into the boss, and other hilarious things. It also plays nicely into the fact that you can't heal, because the only time you will sustain damage will be from a genuine attack, not from being, a little too close for comfort to your target. While the number of different builds you can have in MIO is quite limited, there is still great fun to be had with special enhancer modules, which allow you to increase the number of your trinket slots while putting you at a clear disadvantage. For example, one enhancer lowers your HP by 1 but gives you additional slots, while another shrinks your window for the perfect dodge. I myself never overcharmed in Hollow Knight on my first playthrough because the prospect of being hit for 2 masks was absolutely ridiculous to me, and it still is. But in MIO, due to the way some fights are designed, for the reasons I won't spoil, it doesn't really matter how much HP you have, so you can go all in, enable all enhancers, load up with damage amplifying charms and whatever else you want, and become MIO the Destroyer. I found great fun in that because it is usually difficult for me to compromise my safety in games, but here I felt unshackled. When I finished Hollow Knight many years ago, I thought to myself that I never wanted to play a Metroidvania that didn't have a downward pogo jump. Similarly, after playing MIO, I think that I don't want to play a Metroidvania that doesn't have MIO's traversal ability that puts your entire exploration on its head and makes the world 4 times bigger. By the way, MIO does have a downward pogo jump too, but infuriatingly, it does very little damage and its primary use is recharging energy that you can then spend on your movement abilities like grappling hook or hovering. Double jump is available from the very start, which is wonderful. Initially, I was quite surprised by some reviews often mentioning brutal platforming and some sort of crazy chase sequence. I completely understand that we all perceive difficulty very differently. I often get stuck on the simplest platforming while having less trouble on some more objectively complex sections. And here is my personal take. There isn't a platforming section in MIO that I thought came even close, again, in my personal experience, to Hollow Knight's White Palace, let alone Path of Pain. The chase sequence, you know, the kind where there is lava rising or a wall of lasers chasing you, I thought it was fun and pretty mild compared to something like Ori's Escape from the Ginzo Tree that sometimes still gives me nightmares. I am by no means a stellar Metroidvania player, however, I do think that the words Path of Pain as a marker for an excruciatingly difficult platforming section are being thrown around a little too lightly. I have learned to take into consideration other people's impressions on games' difficulty, but never rely on them when making a decision to play something, because sometimes people say the game is too easy and I can't handle it, and sometimes all reviews mention the game is hard and I cannot see where. You never truly know until you try for yourself. So how about this? If you've played at least one Metroidvania game before, I think MIO is a great choice for your next one. If I have to scour my experience for a complaint, here it is. I thought there was a little too much platforming back to back to back if you decide to not take the ending when it becomes accessible to you, but continue exploring the vessel. There was a solid chunk of the game, an entire area that had no enemies at all, and it was just about platforming, so that was quite tiring if taken in one big gulp. Otherwise, I got nothing. MIO is so delicately crafted with extreme attention to detail that is sometimes straight up unnecessary for anything but the atmosphere, like the way she softly and carefully floats you across the pool when you go to Mel's shop from the Nexus. It is full of melancholy and grief and gentleness. MIO has all the things I treasure so much in games, from the mysterious plot that is possible to fully unravel, to the environmental storytelling that requires nothing but a little bit of your attention to fill in the gaps, from the platforming that is satisfying but subjectively not suffocating, to the boss fights that are fun and require you to memorize the patterns and adapt. The world is very tightly woven and fascinating to explore, and honestly, there isn't much else I asked for. I was absolutely captivated by the world of MIO, and without a doubt you will hear me talk about this game again in my usual roundup of the best games I played during the year. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.